Okay, born at a very early age. My brother Greg isn't here, so he can't question things I will say about the family. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a large Roman Catholic family, 5 boys, 1 girl. I am third from the top or fourth from the bottom, depending how you look at it. My first 8 years of school, from first grade through 8th grade, I went to Roman Catholic school. We had a very devout family, never read the Bible, but devout Roman Catholic family. And I was more preoccupied with sports, but I can't remember. I always went to Mass, always, and of course the Catholic school, but I can't remember a conscious thought toward God during that whole time. Can't remember. There may have been something, but I don't remember it. But all I remember was I desperately wanted to switch schools, to go to the public school, because I had a large group of friends in my neighborhood in Pittsburgh, and we all played sports. And of course, when I got home from the Catholic school, I was a little bit later than when they got home, and that always bugged me. And so come 9th grade, I was thrilled to go to the public schools so I could be with my friends all the time. But once again, I was fairly insecure kind of a guy, where you don't want to fail, so the way you protect yourself from not failing is you don't try. I mean, that's the safest way to go through life. And so it's sort of like when I was not a great athlete, but good enough to get by at times. I remember my last year in high school, and I was going to be the manager of the track team. My school their track program was a big deal. It was a big school. The track program was very good, and I was going to be the manager. That's a pretty safe place to be. And as I was sitting there and looking at everybody coming to sign up, there was a lot of people. And then all of a sudden I began to think, well, this guy's signing up and this guy's signing up. And then I decided, well, what the heck, I'll sign up. Because I could always run. And so that turned out to be the easiest letter that you could ever have. I was a sprinter, and we had a very good team, and so we seldom ever lost. But that was the highlight. And I was just sort of kept my head down in school. That's the way it worked. I then went off to Penn State, and once again I was insecure. There was a guy in our dorm. His name, I'll keep his name quiet, but he was the kind of guy that if you're an unbeliever, it's just the kind of guy you like to be like. He was just, he wasn't tied down by these moral restrictions. He was out to embrace life. And I was his friend. I was his tag-along. And so he was going to be a part of a fraternity. They're a big deal at Penn State. And so I went along with him, and because I wanted to be somebody. And then, of course, they gave bids out, and they gave a bid to him and to me, I think, because they wanted him, because I was the tag-along. Well, it so happened that he had like stomach ulcers. His dad was a doctor. He was physically a wreck, so his dad took him out of school, and the fraternity was stuck with me. And it was not a good fraternity. My father was a engineer, and he went to West Virginia, and he was in a fraternity where guys had good manners, good grades, and that was not my fraternity. My fraternity was always on the verge of being on probation. The grade point average of the fraternity was very low. We had a nice house, and we had a live-in cook. His name was Fat Larry. But he was a great cook. So you ate well. And we had parties all the time. it was just not a conducive place to have any moral sensibility. And but right before, so that's my first 2 years, and my grades were pretty much, I was just about on the verge of always probation. You know, we called it the beans list, 2.0 and under. And because I just wouldn't finish things. And so now we come to the summer of 1970, and I had a girlfriend who was still in high school, 3 years younger than me. It's interesting, Priscilla was 3 years younger than me. And I was just whipped on her, and so she wanted me to go to a meeting. I went to the meeting because that's what she wanted to do. And it was a Youth for Christ meeting for high school kids, Youth for Christ. And so this is a whole new deal for me. So I just sat there, but the gospel was given, and I would assume it was not the best presentation of the gospel, but I became unbelievably convicted of my sin, that I was in deep trouble with the God of heaven and earth. To this day, I can almost feel the feelings. And I didn't become a believer. I was just deeply troubled. And I remember you come on down, you walk down the aisle. I walked down the aisle, and then afterward, and then they want to counsel you afterwards, and I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was not a believer, but I was deeply convicted. I just wanted to be alone. So I remember I wanted to get rid of the girl as quick as possible, drop her off at home, and as best I can tell, late that night, it all sort of fell into place, and I became a believer. I saw my sin. You flee to the cross. You trust in Jesus alone to save you, and you want to follow him as your Lord. Well, during my summers, while I was at Penn State, I was a lifeguard and swimming instructor. And I remember the next day, I go to the pool. And I am very aware that something has dramatically changed. It was like someone reached down inside of me and just changed how I looked at everything. Now, I was biblically ignorant because I didn't grow up reading the Bible. But I was fundamentally changed from the inside out. And there was a Bible study that was tied to that Youth for Christ that they, sort of sent me to. So for 2 weeks, I went there, and it was a pretty serious Bible study, which was great. And then I go to Penn State for my junior year, and with some sort of orientation, had to do with clubs and everything. I remember walking through, all of the clubs had tables up, and I was supposed to get in touch with the navigators. That was the group. But as I walked there, I saw this table, Campus Crusade for Christ, and I was just thinking to myself, I'm one of those. And for the first time and the only time, they had a Sunday afternoon social. And so I went to that. And they were just starting an outreach into fraternities and sororities. So there was a group of about, 6 guys with a staff member, and these were really serious believers. And I was a brand new believer. They were really serious, which is unusual for Campus Crusade. But it was a time of the Jesus movement, and so it's just a whole different time. Paul, who's not here, could tell you all about that time. It was a very unusual time. But whatever. So then I learned how to share my faith, study Scripture, just apply the Lordship of Christ daily. And these other guys from other fraternities, they were better fraternities than mine, but they were just serious believers, very serious. Like they would go home during the summer break and start a citywide sort of campaign, evangelistic sort of outreach, citywide. And so this was just a very unique time. So when I came home on break, I picked up a hitchhiker who said, and I tried to witness to him, and he said, I know some guys like you. And these were 2 Presbyterian youth pastors, and so he took me to their place, and one of the guys sort of took me under his wing. So when I came home to Pittsburgh from Penn State on breaks or the summer, he really discipled me from his point of view. And he's a very faithful guy. And to this day, he's just a godly guy. We don't necessarily share our the same point of view theologically, but he is just a godly guy. And we're friends to this day. So because of him, when I graduated, I mean, you don't really have a serious future being a lifeguard and swimming instructor. So I was going to go to seminary. And my roommate, my apartment roommate, was a guy who was terribly gifted in evangelism and basic discipleship. And we wrote down, we were both involved in leadership and crusade, and we wrote down the pros and cons of, our decisions. What should we do? To go to seminary or go on crusade staff? Those were the choices. Not you could say there's more choices than that available, but from our point of view, we had a bit of a narrow perspective on life. That's all we knew. But as we wrote down, we would jot down pros and cons, and then share. Then we would switch papers, and he would make comments, and I'd make comments, and then we looked at it. And it was interesting. It was rather obvious, if you're going to have those two choices, that he should go on crusade staff, I should go to seminary. Now you need to understand that through high school, all of my life, I had a terrible stuttering problem. I couldn't give you one sentence without stuttering. That's just the way it was. And I just lived with that for a long time. And in crusade there at Penn State, I remember to go to speak, to teach. And amazing that when I taught, I didn't stutter. And began my teaching. And then from there I go on to Covenant Theological Seminary in St. Louis, which is the official seminary for the Presbyterian Church in America, a very conservative, Bible-believing denomination. And it was there that I found out about the Doctrines of Grace. I should say that I had a group of athletes, my small group, my action group. I had a group of athletes, and I had a number of football players, particularly offensive linemen. And so when we would go out for pizza after a study, it was like I had these amazing bodyguards, and it was just an amazing time to be with them. And so I go to seminary, and there remember, I was not a believer for 2 years yet when I went to seminary, which is not the brightest thing to do, but once again, in those days, you didn't know any better, so you just did it. And the guys I was with in seminary really knew their Bible in a great way, and I was just learning. But the Lord, it was a perfect place for me, because at that time, Covenant Seminary was very small, maybe 110, 120 students. Now it's probably over 1,000. But I had really very good sort of small classes with really good teachers. And that's exactly what I needed. I had Francis Schaeffer as a teacher. He would come over. He was part of that denomination. He would come over from Switzerland and give us his whole series of thought from beginning to end. And that was fascinating. So, but going back, when I became a believer, if you ask the question, okay, what's the biggest change in your life? And it was without question, it was, I really fell in love with the Lord of Scripture, with God. I really did. Now, when you say that, you have to have a dose of reality. And by that I mean that my love for the Lord is always contaminated. It's always. I wish it were not, but it always is. So I can never muster up pure motives. I can't do that. But the love is really real. So when we talk about when I teach, being an incurable God lover, I'm really talking about my life. That's what happened. Because I went from nothing to be absolutely indifferent to all of a sudden, this is my life. And so that's what happened. So that was the big change, of course, addressing all my sin and slowly becoming, more holy, but slowly. And then, of course, right halfway through my second of 3 years at Covenant Seminary, I was working as a youth director for a Presbyterian church, and part of my job was to take college students to Urbana. Urbana was a large missionary convention by university. Every 3 years, about 15,000 college students would show up at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and I had to take some students. So I went. My boss at this church, Memorial Presbyterian, he became a believer late in life, out of business. He was a wonderful guy, very real. But we went together, took the students, and then we showed up at the University of Illinois. It was winter. We're talking about the break between Christmas and New Year's. And it was really cold. And we're in the dorm complex waiting to pick up our room keys, and the line horseshoed around. And we are close to getting our key. He looks across at the line that was horseshoeing around. He goes, "I recognize that girl." Well, he went to Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary just north of Boston on the North Shore, and the church he was involved in, he taught Sunday school, was Priscilla's father's church in Lexington. Now, he called her Rose because he couldn't remember her name, but he saw her, but he pointed her out, and that was it. That was it. And so I think the next day we were passing, and we were going out the doors to a big meeting, and the two of them connected. And so then we're going to have lunch together. I remember it was hot dogs. And she had a girlfriend with her, so the girlfriend sat opposite me, and she and this associate pastor began to play "Do you remember so-and-so" game. And of course, I knew nothing what she was talking about. The gal that was with her, we didn't know each other. She didn't know anything what they were talking about. It was a really interesting lunch. And I can't remember exactly, but I think somehow within the next day, we passed again, and I asked her to go to the main meetings. Now, you got to understand, this is the second year in seminary is your hardest. We had a lot of Greek and Hebrew. We have a lot of theology. And so I was just, Christmas break, I just wanted to take in the main sessions and play basketball, go swim, do something, but I just needed a break. And so I asked her to go to the main meeting. She said yes, and so I remember we come back from the meeting, very cold outside, and we're looking for a place to talk, and there's no place to talk alone, but we did find the laundry room. I remember we're sitting on washers and just talking. That's the only place we could be alone. And we were together for a day and a half. I remember we walked through the armory where all the Christian mission groups had their tables. And all I remember is as we're walking through, I would come across this mission group, the Arctic Mission. And that's the last place on earth I wanted to be. But I had kind of a twisted view of how God works with his children. I kind of thought that in order to test your love, he's going to take you to the last place you want to go. What you hate, that's what he's going to do. And I just, walked by that table really fast. And of course, Priscilla, she just hated to go to a place where there's bugs. So it's interesting. Where I've ended up is in Europe, of all places. So it's not the Arctic Mission, and it's not a place for bugs. But whatever. So so we went, I was with a day and a half. She goes back. She was living in Wheaton, Illinois, outside of Chicago. She had gone to Bethel's college, and she had dropped out of school after a year and a half because she was not interested in the academics. She went there to pursue an MRS degree, and she couldn't find a husband, so she left. She was working at an eye clinic. I was in St. Louis, 6 hours away by car. I had a Volkswagen Bug, and I was poor because being in seminary is just sophisticated poverty. And so I was working for a church. I called her. She went home to her mom. This is a New England family that's now in Wheaton, Illinois. And she said, I met the guy I'm going to marry. And her mother tried to console her. Oh, honey, you know, he's a nice boy, but he's probably not even going to call you. I think 10 minutes later I called and invited her down, which was a faux pas. You don't do that. You always go to where she is. That's New England manners. But I couldn't do that. It was interesting. My folks, who in Pittsburgh, my dad was transferred to a company in St. Louis, and they bought a house right in the bedroom community of the seminary. Not because I was there. It was just a nice community. And so for one semester, that spring semester of my second year, I moved back into the house because I'd been away from the house for a while. And that was when Priscilla and I began to correspond. Now you have to understand two things. One is from the day we met to the day we were married, it was 7 months to the day. We averaged seeing each other one weekend a month. And we corresponded with cassette tapes because those were the days, obviously, where long-distance phone calls were expensive. So we would record on a cassette tape, put it in the mail, and send it. She would get it, and then she would re-record over it and send it back. And it was really kind of funny. I wish I would have kept the tape, but it was just one tape, so it eventually died. But she would want to make the perfect tape because she would start and stop, start and stop. And that was the last thing I was interested in because I loved it when she was just struggling with what to say on the tape because she was being real, and that's all I was interested in. So we never had a formal dating relationship. We did go to one movie in Wheaton. I know it cost 50 cents. A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. This is a Solzhenitsyn. This is an account of the Gulag. And so very romantic, so we did that. But Priscilla was just a real believer, not well-grounded, but just loved the Lord. She, how the Lord used her in my life was remarkable in that I was much more of an emotional cripple. I was. And she really discipled me emotionally, how to express love, how to be more out there. And because I had always played it safe and did not put myself out there very much. So it was Thursday, if she was still alive, it would be our 49th anniversary. But of course, she's with the Lord, and that was not what I was planning on. I was always terribly concerned that she'd be taken care of when I was gone. And of course, the Lord had other things in mind, but whatever He does is right. And He has remarkably taken care of me. But just to point this out, the Lord is faithful. His word is always true. You know, He choreographs my life. I'm still responsible, but He does choreograph it. And when we sang the very last song that Dan brought up, "It is well with my soul," that's really true. And that was especially when Scylla passed away. It'll be 2 years on October 25th. That was really the ultimate test. So that's really what's happened to me. So questions?
In the choreograph of your life, would you say that hitchhiker is who sent you to Covenant Seminary?
Yeah. Yeah, it was, because you wouldn't, that's probably the last school I would have picked. But this friend of mine, this youth pastor, he went there. It was a small school, and so because of him, then I went there.
After you were saved, Geoff, how were your early attempts at witnessing amongst your family members?
Profoundly disappointing. You need to understand that when I grew up in a family of 6, a large family, I had no relationships with any of my siblings. And I wasn't aware of how bizarre that sounded until I became a believer and thought about it, because that's all I knew. So I always looked elsewhere for relationships outside the home. I guess I'm the one sibling that would spend long times talking with my mother. I had no relationship with my father, but he didn't have one with anybody, so that didn't matter. He was a great provider, ethical guy, hard worker, disciplined, but relationally he was challenged. He was challenged. That's just the way it was. Yeah.
For anybody not familiar with Campus Crusade for Christ, picking up hitchhikers was sort of a pastime for some of us, because you get an audience that couldn't get out of the car unless you knew.
That's true.
So I have to laugh about that. But I have 2 questions. One, you were introduced to the Doctrines of Grace in 1970, I believe.
Yes.
Right.
No, in really 72 when I went to seminary.
Okay, 72. 2 questions. One, how did that impact you at that point in time, coming out of Crusade, which was very Arminian and had some weird stuff? And the second part is, the environment back in 1972 in America was very evangelical, and I wasn't a believer back then. I don't think there was a lot of opportunities for material and things in terms of the Doctrines of Grace. How did you deal with those 2 issues?
Okay. First off, the group I was a part of, Campus Crusade, there maybe was a couple of hundred students that were involved, but the group that this outreach to fraternities was terribly serious believers. They were very serious. And so the Lord was so kind to have me be a part of that. And that was just a wonderful sort of turbo sort of approach to getting discipled. So that was great. The sovereignty of God was never an issue. In that group, it was very clear. Now, the Doctrines of Grace, the 5 Points, Calvinism, I have a very sad story in that I had in my action group these, athletes, and one of them comes to me with this book, and he goes, "What do you think of this book?" And it was a classic work on the atonement by John Murray. And for those of you, if you don't know, that is one of the classic works on the atonement. It was limited atonement. Jesus only died for the elect, those whom the Father chose to save. Now, when I read that, I thought, this is garbage. This is garbage. And told him, we don't buy this stuff. So it wasn't until I went to Covenant Seminary that I was taught the 5 points, and then I bought into it. But I had to wait till then for that to take place. So I also have another embarrassing moment in my small group, and that has to do with God's will, because a big offensive lineman came to me and said he wasn't sure whether he should continue his relationship with his girlfriend. He was a wonderful believer. Should he continue it? Well, that's a God's will question. Well, I was a little short on knowledge, great on enthusiasm, short on knowledge. And I was aware in the book of Acts, right beginning there, that when the apostles replaced Judas as an apostle, they cast lots. So I'm thinking, God is sovereign, that's good news. Biblically, casting lots, got biblical example from the apostles, that's what we're going to do. So we cast lots, however we did that, and it came up dumper. You know, not my best moment, not my best moment. So this idea of how do we find God's will biblically, that really is important in my life because of what I did, which wasn't very good. So.
You discovered his secret will.
Oh, yeah. You know, and of course, in Campus Crusade, the idea is you put, you know, brand new, just people who are just not, they haven't been a believer very long, you're in charge of other people, and that's really wild. That is wild. We won't get into that. But somehow the Lord protected me.
And the environment at that point in time, in terms of evangelical America.
Oh, the environment. Oh, it was a whole different time. I mean, there was an emotional fervor for Jesus Christ going on that I haven't seen since. People were becoming believers. Not that they all became real believers. That's not true. But it was there was stuff happening. Getting a crowd because of Jesus Christ was not difficult. Not difficult. I remember at Penn State, we would have Jesus rallies. You have a couple hundred students, and it's like a pep rally for Jesus. I mean, that's a little unusual, but that was part of what happened at that time.